Okay, so what I want to do in this video is talk more about production being wealth. And the reason that production is wealth is because it allows us to consume more. So the real, I suppose, test of what wealth is for an economy is the average amount that, or the amount of stuff or produce or goods and services that the average citizen can consume, okay? Because we get utility or satisfaction or happiness in material terms from consuming products. So we're going to talk about, again, production as wealth. Why? Because it allows for consumption to be higher, and that's the real test of wealth. And we're going to talk more about the relationship between money, production and prices, and also why you have always believed, and correctly so in every occasion, I suppose, why having more money makes you richer. Now, the thing is, I'll give the game away at the start. It's not about having just more money. What it is about having a higher fraction or percentage of the current money supply. Okay, and we're going to try and make more sense of that in a second. So we're going to start off with a thought experiment. And what we're going to say is there's one good produced and the total money supply, all the total amount of notes and coins in the economy when you add them up, is €100. And then the question becomes, okay, well, how much does this iPhone cost if the total money supply is €100? Now, I think a lot of students struggle with this sometimes, but to start off, basically the premise is all the money buys all the goods. Okay, so whether this iPhone was produced this year, last year, whatever, it's completely irrelevant. It was produced at some stage. That's all the production that was in the economy. And we have €100 in total in the economy. All the money buys all the goods. So therefore that one iPhone costs €100. Now, if we expand our thought process a little bit and we say, okay, look at now the production is 2 iPhones. Okay, and this is what you have to understand. The money supply has stayed the same. Production has increased from 1 to 2 iPhones and the money supply is still €100. Well, how much does each iPhone cost? Are we richer? How many goods and services does the existing money supply buy? All of these things. Well, has production increased? Yes. So the very first thing you should be thinking is straight away we're richer as an economy because total production, GDP, gross domestic product, has increased. And that's what GDP measures, is the total value of all goods and services produced in a country in a year. So production has increased. Are we better able to satisfy our material wants and needs? Well, I'm just keeping this that iPhones, but think about everything has increased. Well, yes, we are. The production of everything has increased. The money supply has stayed the same. So I'm asking you, resulting from an increase in production and no increase or no change even in the money supply, what has happened to the price of these iPhones? Well, there's all the money buys all the goods. There's €100. There's 2 identical iPhones. So therefore, 100 divided by 2 essentially is €50 each. Now, comparing that, what has happened? Well, production's increased. Therefore, from this situation here, it was €100. Production has increased. Therefore, scarcity has fallen. And prices are simply just a measure of scarcity. Yes, they're a measure of value, all that kind of stuff, but they're a measure of scarcity. Okay, so scarcity has fallen because production has increased. We're richer because production has increased. The money supply has stayed the same, therefore the prices are going to fall. So what you need to keep in mind is what's the effect in prices, in general level of prices, the rate of inflation, shall we say, from a change in production and also a change in the money supply. Okay, so when the money supply stays the same and production increases, prices fall from €100 to €50. Again, you have to ask the question, production has increased. We've had economic growth. Are we better off? Yes. Okay, we're better able to satisfy our material needs. Okay, I understand that no one person needs 4 iPhones. I completely get that. But I'm just saying I'm using one good to try to explain what happens to prices when production rises. Well, what happens to prices when production rises? The money supply has stayed the same. We're not changing that yet. Production has increased. We are richer. We're better capable of satisfying our material wants and needs. We can consume more. Okay, so therefore, and scarcity has fallen because production has increased. So if scarcity has fallen, what happens to prices? Well, prices fall. Okay, so now there's 4 iPhones. There's €100 and 100 divided by 4 is essentially 25. So each iPhone now costs 25. And see, this is a very important thing to kind of realize in economics, is that production makes things, an increase in production makes things more affordable, particularly to everybody, but, you know, I suppose potentially most importantly to those that are worst off financially, the poorest. So the best way to increase their standard of living, as we have already said throughout these videos, is to increase production, because what you will see on the market is prices fall. Okay, that's what you should see. Okay, now let's just say now production has not changed, and this is really important, but the money supply is increased. Well, if the money supply is increased, okay, everybody has more money, and then you're like, okay, well, if you have more money, you're richer. And I'm saying, well, no, you're not, because production hasn't changed, but in this scenario, instead of only €100 existing, there's €200 existing. So are you in any way better capable to consume more? And just keep an eye on the screen and on the scenario. The answer is no. There's 4 iPhones. All that can be consumed in this economy is 4 iPhones. Our ability to consume hasn't changed because our ability to produce hasn't changed. All that has changed is our ability to hand over more money in exchange for these goods. So in the previous example, what we had here, there was 4 iPhones, €100. Each iPhone cost €25. Now there's 4 iPhones. You are in no way able to buy and consume more, but you are able to pay more. So what happens to prices? Well, prices rise. So there's now €200. There were 4 iPhones. There still are 4 iPhones. So 200 divided by 4 is 50. And that's the effect of increasing the money supply following no change in production. If the money supply increases when production doesn't change, all that results is higher prices. Okay, so we've talked about when the money supply doesn't change and production increases, that results in lower prices. When the production doesn't change and the money supply increases, that results in higher prices. Now again, this is trying to elaborate and develop the idea which you have in your mind, I'm sure, which is all that I have to do is get more money. Okay, so we still have a production amount of 4 iPhones. Still, the money supply is €200. So 200 divided by 4. The reason why I say divided by 4 is because they are the exact same good. Therefore, they would have the exact same price. It wouldn't work if you had like a pack of chewing gum in a house, of course. But I've made it easier in order to, I suppose, illustrate the example by just keeping the goods the same. So 4 iPhones, €200. Each one costs €50. So there's one way you can look at it. Well, if each one costs €50, and I think we understand how we're getting these prices, I hope so anyway, and this guy has €100, so therefore he can buy 2. And this guy has €100, and he does, and therefore he can buy 2, because 50 divided into 100 goes twice, so there's 2 iPhones he can buy. The way that I want you to think about this from now on is, what percentage does each person have? What percentage of the money supply does each person have? Well, if there's €200 in total, this guy has €100, this guy has €100, therefore each of them can buy half of the total amount that exists in the economy, half of the total amount that was at some stage produced in the past. Now that's different, and that's the real thing that you have to get your head around. I'm going to explain a little bit more. Okay, so now each person has double the money that they had previously. Double the money. But the amount of goods or the amount of output that they can buy, they can consume, has not changed. All that has changed is their ability to give more euros for each good. So total money supply is now €400. There are 4 iPhones, therefore each iPhone costs €100. All that's happened from increasing the money supply is an increase in prices, particularly when it's not followed by any increase or change in production. And again, what we're saying here, and this is important because what we're saying here is we've gone from having €200 each to only €100 each. So the amount of money that each person has fallen. Okay? But let's check it. Here, each person could buy 2 iPhones. Here now, There's 200 euro in the economy. There's 8 iPhones. 200 divided by 8 is 25. So each person can afford 4 iPhones. Each person can afford more here with less money. And why? Because again, they had 200 euro each there and there was 4 iPhones in total. Now they have 100 euro each, but there's 8 iPhones in total. And why? What has brought about that, increase in wealth? And it's not the amount of money that they have, it was the amount of production. That's what caused them to be richer. So each can afford to buy more. And what was the effect of the increase in production and simultaneously the reduction in the money supply and prices? Well, it's fallen from up here, which I believe is 100 euro each, to down here, which is 25 euro each. They have less money here. Each of them have less money, yet they can afford to buy more stuff. And again, I'm going to kind of press this point. What fraction do each of the money supply do each of these control or have? And the answer is a half. So therefore, they can buy half of the total output. And half of the total output is 4. So each person can buy 4 iPhones. Now what we're going to say is, we're going to keep the money supply the same. And we're going to keep the production the same. And you would say, okay, money supply is 200 euro. That's 8 things produced. It's 25 euro each. Each of them gets 4. Now, be very clear on this point. I am not changing the amount of money at all. I'm not changing the production. All I'm changing is who has what percentage. So let's look at it this way, and then we'll try and bring it to another way. There's 200 euro in the economy. There's 8 iPhones, so therefore each iPhone costs 25. If this guy has 150 iPhones, okay, 25 into 150, I believe, is 6. He can buy 6 iPhones. If this guy only has 50 at a price of 25, he can buy 2. But let's look at it this way. This guy now has 75% of total money supply. That means he can buy 75% of all the goods that exist in the economy. Now 75% of 8 is 6. This guy is 25%, 25% of 8 is 2. That's why having more money makes you richer in the terms that most people understand it. It's because if I give you 100 euro, that's 100 euro from my pocket into your pocket. The money supply hasn't changed in that scenario, and therefore you can afford to buy a higher percentage of the output. If, however, I give this guy, let's say 300 euro, and this guy 100 euro, this guy still can own 75% of the money supply, and this guy still owns 25% of the money supply. So therefore, the allocation of who gets what won't change. Because if you have 75% of the money supply, you can buy 75% of the goods. The only thing that will cause these guys to be richer is if total production has increased. And that's the thing that I need you to understand. So when you have more money, yes, that's great. You do have more money. But the thing is, what you actually have, more accurately, is a higher percentage of hopefully a consistent money supply. A money supply that's not changing. And that's why having more money makes you richer. But now you understand why. It's because you can control or buy or consume a higher fraction of the production. And if I took away all of those iPhones, all that money would buy them nothing. So production is something that gives value to money. Now, if we look here and we say, look, okay, production is not as high as the previous example. Each person has 100 euro. Total money supply is 200. This person still has half of the existing money supply. Therefore, this person can buy half the goods. And that's the way you look at it. Now, you need to understand, in a later video I'll explain more about the exact or precise connection between money supply, production and prices, or changes in prices more accurately. But just straight away, if you see that this guy has half the money supply and this guy has half the money supply, therefore forgetting about prices, that each of them can afford half the production. And they're worse off now because production has fallen, even though the money supply hasn't changed. So this is why I want you to understand, this is why I'm trying to get to you. Do we see why printing money doesn't make a country rich? Printing money doesn't make anybody rich per se, because all that happens is prices rise. Now, later, in a much later video, we can understand why if you print money and then you're the first to spend it, it does make you better off. Okay, and that's why you see dictators, particularly somebody like Robert Mugabe or other dictators in like previously Hugo Chavez in Venezuela, printing money had massive inflation, but it helped them because they were the first ones to spend it. But printing money in general doesn't make a country rich. All it does is it causes inflation. What makes an individual rich? Well, I'll tell you, it's two things. It's greater production in the economy, combined with having a greater fraction of the existing and hopefully constant money supply. Okay? How much production has occurred? Well then, how big is the money supply? And what fraction of the money supply do you own? They're the things that really make an individual rich. And all we're saying is, what do we call an increase in production? Well, we're going to call it economic growth. And what do we call an increase in the general level of prices? Well, we call that inflation. And look back and see if you can work out what the relationship is between production, money supply, and prices. And I hope that you can understand now what the relationship between those three are. And in a later video, we're going to do a much more succinct view or look at what causes each of these things to change.